All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We're looking at an incredibly rare constitutional puzzle today, one that literally upended a major election overnight. We are dealing with a situation that election officials, candidates, and voters almost never see coming. Today, we're analyzing the source material surrounding the 2026 South Carolina U.S. Senate race. This was an election that started off as your totally standard political contest, but very quickly evolved into a completely unprecedented legal and logistical anomaly. So here's the core question we're dealing with. What actually happens when a winning candidate suddenly passes away? I mean, it's one thing if someone drops out or loses a primary, right? But what happens to the whole democratic process when voters have already spoken, the nominee is locked in, and then, tragically, they pass away before the general election? Imagine being a voter in that scenario. This kind of rare anomaly forces an entire state to scramble, dig into some very obscure election codes, and completely reset a major ballot. Part 1. The South Carolina landscape. To really grasp the stakes here, we've got to rewind all the way back to 1998. That was the absolute last time a Democrat actually won a U.S. Senate seat in South Carolina. So for over 2 decades now, the state has been widely considered a rock-solid Republican stronghold. Establishing this history is absolutely crucial because it tells us just how incredibly valuable that Republican nomination actually is in this specific state. And that Republican dominance, it's not just holding steady, it's actively growing. Just look at the recent presidential margins from the source data. Donald Trump won the state by 12 points back in 2020, and then that margin jumped to 18 points in 2024. Add to that, the Republican Party controls supermajorities in both chambers of the state legislature, and they hold practically every single statewide office. So this is the exact environment the 2026 Senate race was born into. Right at the center of this political landscape was Senator Lindsey Graham. He was first elected to the U.S. Senate in 2002 after beating Democrat Alex Sanders, and he's been a total fixture in South Carolina politics ever since. Going into 2026, he was aiming for his 5th term. And he had a really proven track record of defending his seat, like when he fended off that highly publicized, massively funded challenge from Jaime Harrison back in 2020. Part 2. The Republican primary. Fast forward to June 9th, 2026. The Republican primary unfolds pretty much exactly as everyone expected. Senator Graham comfortably locks down the nomination with nearly 57% of the vote. He easily defeated his closest challenger, appliance repair executive Mark Lynch, who got about 28.9%, while the rest of the votes were scattered among a few other candidates. Graham was, once again, the official standard-bearer for the party. But the real measure of Graham's momentum? It was sitting right there in the bank. His campaign had amassed a staggering $20.6 million. To put that into perspective, Mark Lynch raised a respectable but obviously much smaller $5.7 million. So it was crystal clear. Graham was institutionally locked in and fully resourced to coast right into a November victory. Part 3. An unexpected turn. Then, literally just a month after celebrating his primary win and locking in his nomination, the entire political world was stunned. On July 11th, 2026, Senator Lindsey Graham suddenly passed away from cardiac arrest. He was 71 years old. And just like that, in an instant, this deeply established incumbent was gone, leaving a massive, completely unexpected void right at the very top of the South Carolina ballot. Which brings us right back to that core question from earlier. What actually happens when a nominee passes away before the general election? Now, you might assume the party just, hands the nomination over to the runner-up from the primary, right? Well, actually, no. Election laws are specifically designed to stop backroom handoffs in order to protect the democratic process. You can't just leave a blank space on a ballot. So the state's legal framework has to kick in to make sure voters still get a real say in who replaces the nominee.
Part 4. Special primary rules.
The actual answer is buried deep in the specific language of South Carolina Code Section 7-11-55. The law explicitly mandates that a vacancy created by the death of a primary selected nominee requires an entirely new, fast-tracked special primary. The party absolutely does not get to just quietly appoint a replacement behind closed doors. The voters have to head back to the polls. And wow, let's just look at how incredibly aggressive this legal timeline is. The statute breaks it all down into a rapid 3-step sprint. Step 1, a super brief 1-week filing window opens almost immediately. Step 2, the special primary is held on the second Tuesday after filing closes. In Step 3, if nobody gets a majority, there's a runoff just 2 weeks later. Think about that for a second. Organizing a massive statewide election at absolute warp speed, it is a total logistical nightmare for election officials who have to suddenly design, print, and ship out entirely new ballots statewide. Because of this strictly enforced legal timeline, the special Republican primary to replace Senator Graham on the ballot was scheduled for August 11th, 2026. Basically, candidates had mere weeks to file, raise cash, campaign, and somehow convince voters to drag themselves back out to the polls in the sweltering heat of late summer for an election literally no one planned for. Part 5. The Democratic Nominee. Now, while the Republican ticket is thrown into total chaos, waiting quietly on the other side of the aisle is the Democratic nominee, Annie Andrews. She's a pediatrician who navigated her own primary season perfectly smoothly. She locked in her spot on the general election ballot without dealing with any of the constitutional drama hitting the Republicans. If we look at the June 9th Democratic primary data, Andrews secured a really decisive victory. She comfortably won the nomination with 61.5% of the vote, beating former Payne College Administrator Brandon Brown, who took 38.5%. And honestly, this dynamic gives her a massive strategic advantage. Because while the GOP is forced to run this frantic, unprecedented midsummer special primary, burning through cash and completely exhausting their base, Andrews gets to rest, strategize, and aim all of her focus directly at November.
Part 6. Looking ahead.
You know, following the money always reveals the true health of a campaign, and suddenly we are looking at a highly competitive financial landscape. Checking out the cash on hand based on the FEC reports, Mark Lynch, the runner-up in the original GOP primary, is sitting on about $3.3 million. Right behind him, Democratic nominee Annie Andrews, holding over $2.6 million. Whoever manages to survive the Republican special primary is going to need absolutely every single dollar they can scrape together to instantly pivot to a statewide general election campaign. Because here's the thing, that ultimate deadline, it doesn't move. The general election remains firmly locked in for November 3rd, 2026. Whoever emerges from that chaotic, fast-tracked August 11th special primary, plus any potential runoff, is going to face a deeply compressed window. Usually, a traditional campaign takes well over a year, but these candidates, they'll have just a couple of months to unite their party and mount a full-blown campaign against Andrews. It completely upends all traditional political spending and strategy. Ultimately, all of this leaves us asking a really critical question. How do virtually unprecedented legal triggers like this shift the entire balance of strategy and turnout? When a settled race is suddenly thrown wide open by a tragic, completely unexpected event, literally every assumption about voter enthusiasm, campaign spending, and election mechanics just flies right out the window. If an obscure legal trigger reset a major election in your state tomorrow, how would your local parties handle the chaos? It's a fascinating look at the unpredictable nature of democracy, and right now, all eyes are on South Carolina to see exactly how this plays out.